through your folder and find this 2-page COLA handout. Several weeks ago, yes. Yep, if you have it in your folder. Also, there were a number of copies sitting around, and I don't know whether oh, Cecil's got it. So if you need it, just raise your hand so we can get them quickly. Okay.
You don't have a copy here. 6.5. One for each of you. We know the bilingual thing, so I do German. So people learn. And it works out well. You know, she's great. She's sticking to German. It's obviously a little tougher because it's been around and seen her, so
Okay.
proud of
Yeah,
what
quick question.
she's doing.
Strengthen your OMCs. That's the OBC or is that acronym? I don't know. Organized mediating communities. Oh, you go. Mediating. It's actually, yes, its own. It's actually its own thing. I've got a second
It's the movement.
All right.
Shop.
Okay, so if you don't have one, don't take any more time looking for them. Cecil's got a bunch of extra copies. So just raise your hand if you can't find it. Great. So thanks again to Glee and John and Alex for doing that. That was applause. Sorry. That's great. I'm just smiling just because. What else can you do after that?
Being in the now does that.
It does that, doesn't it? So I'm going to talk a bit about these two questions. The first one that we asked you to do a little reflecting and journaling on for this week. So how do we, wrapping our heads around, how do we collectively move toward the second yes? Okay? And secondly, what role do our congregations specifically have in that movement? Okay, those are the two questions we're focusing on. Because we're kind of getting towards the end of our time together here, so we might want to be thinking about this. All right. So the first question is, how do we collectively, including our organized mediating communities, I can put that up here, organized mediating communities, which is on your packet on the back. I'm going to get back to this in just a second. That's like our congregation, right? Other traditional organized mediating communities have been like labor unions or public schools or other nonprofit civil sector organizations. Okay? So how do we collectively move toward the second yes? How do we go about creating this thing that we've been calling the Biocommons? It's like, what is that anyway? The Biocommons meaning something like the public space, public life, public dealings and interactions that reflect and nurture the sacred life and relationships of the entire biosphere. Right? That don't just benefit a few particular creatures within the biosphere, but reflect and nurture the whole of life in the biosphere. How do we create a public life that does that? Public structures, public ways of being. That's a hint about what Biocommons is. Public life that honors and reflects the entire biosphere. So what I'm going to share with you tonight might sound a little bit like a sermon. Because I'm just kind of a preacher by trade and I can't help myself given a platform. But actually, more than that, in truth, it might sound a little bit more like a sermon because it's really more like a fragile statement of faith. Because the truth of the matter is that I don't know how we do this. I don't know how we stand up and face this captivity system, right, that we've been exploring. I don't know how we do that. This captivity system, this life-destroying no. How do we stand up to that within the, 14, 13 years that we have to make drastic changes? Right? How do we do that? And then try to create some second yes that has any impact at all. I don't know how we do this. And none of us does. So that's why it's a statement of faith. Because nobody knows, none of us knows, like how or when this addictive captivity system is going to hit bottom. Or how devastating the effects of climate change, climate chaos are going to be. Or what this second yes is going to have to look like in the meantime. Or ultimately what this historical moment is going to require of us. None of us knows really what that is. Is there going to be some tipping point where the system will just collapse? Or where all these organizations, all this, like, these little teeny bits of the second yes that we've been looking at, right, that are going to just, like, coalesce and, like, it will just, like, shift it in some way, right? So it's happening all over the world. Or will there be a great spiritual awakening out of this crisis? And so all the manufactured wealth that this captivity system created might finally be channeled into some sort of life-sustaining structures and infrastructure. Or will anything we do here in the Biocommons vision and our little congregations matter, let alone survive? I sometimes feel when I think about this, like Thomas Merton, who started his prayer, "My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end." I see some heads nodding. Are you with me?
Amen.
So this Biocommons class has been and is really more about process than product, because we honestly don't know exactly what that product needs to be, right? Or could or should look like, and we actually don't know exactly how to get there. But we have glimmers. We have hints. We have some tools. We have the stories that we have inherited from our ancestors in faith and struggle. And we have the wisdom of our own experience and the experience of those around us, which is rich and deep and powerful and enough. So it's out of this place of radical trust, essentially, that we ask this question. How then do we move toward the second yes when we don't know where we're going? How do we go about creating this thing called Biocommons? Well, what we've been building toward in this Biocommons class is this. When our congregations are organized mediating communities, whether they're well-established or whether they're brand new, whether they're big or whether they're little, when our congregations truly claim their power as organized mediating communities and actually mediate, I'll talk a minute about what that exactly means. It's a statement of faith and belief that we can actually make the difference. Like when we're actually doing that job, we can actually make significant change. And there are historical examples where that has been absolutely true. So what does it mean to mediate then? So if you look on page 2 of your handout, you'll remember this bottom one, right? Where the market sector is kind of taken over everything. Right? Taken over essentially the entire public arena and shapes the worldview of it. Shapes its worldview. Shapes our worldview. That is a primary source of the pressure on our families, on our ecosystem, on the planet, on everything. So to mediate in this kind of context means 3 things. If you look on page 4 now, this top diagram, it's just one way of illustrating the family or the household or individuals in the center, and then this market sector that's taken over everything, the entire public arena, and the OMCs, the organized mediating communities, standing between and performing some mediating functions. And so what I mean by mediating functions are 3 things. It's just a slightly different order than the list that's on this diagram here. The first is to protect and to nurture the families or households by standing between them and the public pressures, the worldview that's coming at us from this highly coordinated system.
What's that again?
What's that?
I didn't catch all
Yeah, it stands between.
Okay.
Stands between and protects and nurtures, right? So we've got one fantastic example right in our community right now. Francisco Aguirre, right? Augustana Lutheran Church is literally standing between him and his family and ICE. That is mediating. That is a concrete, a specific, real example of exactly this. Of a congregation saying, no, we are going to protect this family. Right? But now that can happen in a thousand other ways too. Right? And that's for us to look at how it already does happen in our communities, right? And then say, actually, that's really what we're supposed to be about. One of the very key pieces of mediating. To mediate also means to become a place of learning and moral development, and a place of interpreting reality. Not just interpreting scripture, not just telling stories of faith, right? But interpreting all of reality. Not just the spiritual part of reality. All of reality. Do your congregations do this regularly? Right? But how else do we do that, right? Then we're just left alone and we read our books and we're like, oh, wow, that's a good idea, and but it's not in community, right? There's not a corporate sense of understanding what the hell's going on, right? Or how things really are. We need people to be able to do that with, right? So one way, here's an example, that Wilderness Way seeks to be able to do that too, to interpret more than just spiritual reality, is that we explicitly seek our moral grounding and worldview in both the prophetic Christian tradition and also the world of nature. We will not do one without the other. We also partner with organizations like Eco-Faith Recovery and with Levin to help give us shared understanding and analysis. So we've got like 5 Wilderness Way folks here in this class, right? We've had a number of other people before, and to me, as pastor of Wilderness Way, that's key. I want as many as possible to come through experiences like this so we can develop some shared understanding and shared language, right? Even if it's not all that we all agree about it, right? But like we're deepening our understanding and awareness and our interpretation of reality. What's real? And it helps us become more powerful. And third, to mediate is to become a place for developing relational and leadership skills. And so it becomes a ground and a platform for organizing. So Levita last week gave the example of Levin, right? They do this series, organized series of dozens and dozens of one-to-one conversations, right? And out of that, they bring together for house meetings and they do some discernment, like, what's going on? What are you hearing in these conversations? Oh, and then they find themes, like, look at that. There's lots of people thinking about that same thing. Okay, let's do some more discernment. Oh, let's do some more discernment. Oh, and then all of a sudden a vision arises, and they can act collectively, right? That's what a community can do. That is a mediating function of an organized mediating community. And that is power. Without these things, it's hard to act with power. And it's also hard to act corporately. This kind of grounding builds capacity. We've been talking about building power and capacity. This builds power and capacity. It also opens up imagination and possibility and vision. And so how do we move toward the second yes? Starts by reorganizing our faith communities and any organization we're part of, really, right? To actually mediate in these 3 ways. To actually do this. That's really powerful. To do that. And then we get to work with other organized mediating communities, and what could be possible? So that's the first thing. Moving toward the second yes also starts with that one-to-one conversation. Now we talked about that. We read the burning bush story last week as an example of that. But this is also a statement of faith. The one-to-one conversation is the way to move towards the second yes. Not because it's a foundational practice of organizing, though it is, but because it's a sacred encounter. So if you remember way back, that very, very first spiritual exercise we did, where we breathed together, right, and we ate the grapes, and we drank the water, and we made these connections, we felt our pulse, and we were hoping to make this connection like, guess what? I'm actually the biosphere walking around, right? And so are you, right? That's what we are. We are the biosphere together, living and breathing. We are all made of the sacred elements of life, right? So it's like we've got this sacred encounter happening, and the biosphere is present because that's us, right? And the whole entire cosmos is present because that's also us, right? And then the great mystery that we can hardly fathom is also present because that's also us. Like all that is present in the sacred moment. Is in the dances, right? It's in the sacred dances too. It's in these sacred encounters. And when I'm truly present with that, with another human being, or with any other life form, right? Remember in Dick Harmon's paper, he's talking about having a one-to-one conversation with a plant, right? And some of you were probably going, I don't get it. But this is what he's talking about. He's talking about that this is life. And when we're truly present to it, it is sacred. These encounters are sacred. Now, that may not be your conscious experience in a one-to-one conversation every single time. However, I hope after this class it will be. I hope it will be. But, you see, the captivity system that we're in, here's what it does. It makes this big wall between us and the sacredness of what we're experiencing, really, right? So that we just have a conversation, and it's not sacred. It's not. We're not having an encounter with the biosphere, right? Because that's how this system maintains its power, is by distracting us from what's actually true, from what's actually real. And in the process, it turns everything from a sacred encounter into just a functional it. We're just a bunch of it's functioning, right? We are turned into a commodity. We all feel that way, right? And this commodification shows up everywhere. Shows up in our workplaces. Anybody? Right? Shows up in our schools. I can attest to that. I see it in my schools with my boys. Shows up in our volunteer work, in our activist work. Shows up in our congregations. Right? Where you're functional. And if you're not functional, there's a problem. Shows up everywhere, and it keeps us small and powerless. Because it cuts us off from this life that's all around us and in us. I was having a conversation with Crystal last week. Are you okay sharing the story about Midday? Yeah. Because we were talking about this exact thing, right? Crystal has been an intense activist in all kinds of ways, and including organizing the May Day marches. And she's committed to that, but she told me that that experience of that organizing work, there's never been any one-to-one conversations that have happened in that organizing work, right? And that she feels like she has to just function, show up and function. And if she doesn't show up, it will just be like, yeah, okay, who's the next person? No, not, who's the next functionary who can do this job, right? Because we need jobs done. And so we need people to do those jobs, right? And it becomes just as dehumanizing as the system they're fighting against, right? That's what happens in our congregations too. It becomes just as dehumanizing. So we started wondering together, what if she asked some of the other key organizers to have an intentional relational conversation? And started perhaps like sharing that perhaps maybe they could do that even in this work. Take 10 minutes out of the agenda, right? And have to do some relational work. And what could happen, right? And in the process, maybe the sacredness would appear, but at least the humanity may appear, right? So the intentional relational conversation, this simple one-to-one, is really a powerful act of resistance that can help us remember the sacredness and the connection of all life. And in doing so, it unseats this worldview from its powerful place. It makes a little crack. A little crack in the worldview. So Dick Harmon, he was going to write a paper for this class, and it's still in process. But we were talking, and it is his mustard seed of faith that when a congregation orients itself to this mediating work and publicly shares the stories that arise and the awakenings that arise out of these one-to-one conversations, when a congregation publicly recognizes the sacredness of these conversations and the stories that come from them and the people that are having them, that congregation makes these tiny cracks. Into that seemingly impenetrable worldview of the captivity system. And when we dare to stay in that teeny crack for just a little while and push back on it, put some pressure of our own on that little crack, well, there's no guarantees. There are never any guarantees. But there's also no telling what miracles or what wondergrounds might come from it. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, if you have the faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there. You can say to this worldview, you are not all powerful anymore." But as our song goes, if we want to move this mountain, we must move together.
So does that mean we don't have mustard seed side of faith? Sorry, if it requires all of us, then we must not have faith that size.
Well, let's see. All right, sermon's over. Oh boy. Sorry about that. You're supposed to have one-to-ones now. And you'll get some really short one-to-one. You'll get a really short sacred encounter right now. But if it's a sacred encounter, right, it doesn't take time, right? It can be a couple minutes. So just take a couple minutes and share with just somebody, just any of the felt feelings or responses that came from any of this today, and then take a break. Okay? Somebody from